Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Digital Twin Theory podcast of 2025. As always, Davide Montesarchio here as your host, and today we will continue on the In Silico Medicine applications. This month, we will focus on musculoskeletal applications, and much more. I'm happy and excited to welcome our host for today, as for the first time, we will have the occasion to discuss in person. So, let me introduce you to Marco Viceconti, professor at the University of Bologna. To be honest, I could spend the entire length of the episode just mentioning all the titles, positions, honors and charges he has covered during his brilliant career. So I will just limit myself to mention that he has been founder and director of the Medical Technology Lab at Istituto Ortopedico Rizzoli, founder and executive director of the Insigneo Institute for In Silico Medicine, and also the VPHi's first executive director. So, Marco, you are an expert on musculoskeletal in silico medicine applications. What are the possibilities in this sense? What can we simulate and use such simulations for?
The concept of in silico medicine, in particular, the idea that you can build a computer model which can predict an information that is essential for taking a clinical decision regarding an individual patient, it's a general concept that in principle it applies to any domain of medicine, to any pathology, to any activity in the medical practice. However, because the origins of the concept of in silico medicine are related to models that are built using biophysical knowledge, it is not a surprise that the areas where in silico medicine has been developing faster are those domains like the cardiovascular or the musculoskeletal, where a lot of the physiology and the pathology are regulated by fundamental physical laws. And so by knowing these laws, you can predict relevant physiological and pathological processes. So the history of in silico medicine in musculoskeletal application is as old as the history of in silico medicine. It was one of the first applications we had from the very beginning.
And are there in silico musculoskeletal applications that are already accessible to patients?
The answer is yes. There are a few things, but it's very interesting to see the parallel trajectories of in silico medicine solution for that cardiovascular segment and the musculoskeletal segment. The research started about the same time. The class of problems are similar. To some extent, they are even more challenging in the cardiovascular than they are in the musculoskeletal. But in spite of this, today, if you look at solutions that are on the market, there is a lot more in silico medicine solution for cardiovascular than for musculoskeletal. I've been thinking a lot about why this is the case, and I believe one of the reasons is that there is a fundamental difference in the attitude of these two medical domains. Clinicians working in the cardiovascular area deal with diseases that are potentially life-threatening. You can die by a cardiac failure or something like that. And they generally have an approach that their current standard of care is not good enough, which is, the first step to say, well, let's try something new, let's try some new technology, some innovations, okay? So the rate of adoption of innovation in the cardiovascular domain is much higher than the one in the musculoskeletal domain, where instead we tend to deal with, most of the time, with chronic diseases. So you don't die by osteoarthritis. You are miserable, but you don't die. And in general, the attitude of the practitioners is, what we do is good enough, okay? I think the discourse is changing today because more and more the conversation about healthcare system move from mortality as the primary metrics of efficacy to quality of life and cost effectiveness of quality of life. And then it turns out that musculoskeletal disease are number one disease in terms of loss of quality of life, okay? So I think the scenario is changing, but still there is not much available on the market today in the musculoskeletal area. One area that was developed from the very beginning, and there are at least two commercial solutions that I'm aware of, is technologies that use digital twin approach to better predict the risk of bone fracture upon falling in fragile elders, okay? People affected typically by a disease known as osteoporosis or in general having a musculoskeletal frailty. This is a very important pathology, both in terms of clinical impact. There is about 1 million only hip fracture in the world every year. About 20 to 30% of those patients will die of related complication after the fracture within a few months. And the remaining, another third, will remain functionally impaired. So the burden of disease, as we said, is pretty high. So socially is a very important condition. Historically, the standard of care is the use of bone densitometry. So essentially, we measure how much bone there is in the body of the patient. Now, this information is not sufficient, let me say, to predict the risk of fracture. Okay, what various group has been doing is to use a higher source of information, which is provided by computed tomography, to build digital twins that can predict actually the force required to fracture the femur. And then this is a parameter that has been shown to be much more accurate in stratification. So for this, there are two commercial solutions. One is developed in the United States and originate from the group of Tony Keveni at the University of Berkeley. Another one is run by a group in Tel Aviv. We in Bologna, in my team, historically have been developing a similar solution, which is called the Bologna Biomechanical Computed Tomography, BBCT for short. But we consciously decided not to position it as a commercial product, but to position it only as a research tool, but is being used in a number of clinical experimentation and clinical studies across the world. So this is just one example of one of the many applications of in silico medicine in musculoskeletal pathology.
When computer modeling and simulation methods became available, they were quickly applied in many other engineering fields. For instance, for buildings, bridges, cars. Most of an airplane today is just designed on the computer and tested as well. But this didn't happen for healthcare, or at least is not happening at the same pace. Why is that?
Of course, we posed ourselves this question since the beginning of the Virtual Physiological Human initiative in 2006. And the answer we gave ourselves for many years was because any living organism is much more complex than any other application of computer modeling and simulation. That's not really true. Because today, for example, think about weather forecast. I mean, the prediction of the atmospheric weather in a town, in a small area, is as complicated as predicting changes in the physiology of the human body. You know, it's an incredibly complex system. But, you know, the use of computer modeling and simulation in meteorology dates back to the 70s. That's not the only reason. Of course, it's a factor, but it's not the reason. Recently, I started to reflect about this in relation to a particular strong resistance to the use of modeling and simulation that I found in certain biomedical environment, in particular the pharmacology community, and in particular the regulatory science expert of pharmacology. And I came to a realization. In science, one very important tool is how you do statistical inference, which means, given a series of experimental observation, how you extract a conclusion from this observation. You know? Surprisingly, there are two methods to do this, which are almost entirely incompatible one to each other, but they're both used in science. But certain scientific community tend to prefer one or another, because historically that particular type of statistical inference model is more effective in that scientific domain. So the two statistical inference models are the so-called frequentist inference and the so-called Bayesian inference. Okay, frequentist inference is the standard de facto, for example, in social sciences. So for a frequentist, the truth exists, but is hidden. You accept the fact that when you're observing a phenomenon, you rarely are able to measure the phenomenon quantitatively, so you most of the time give qualitative or semi-quantitative description. And it is impossible to make observations that are completely clean of any bias. So your observations are always dirty of uncontrollable biases, okay? When it's time to take decision, you put a lot of trust on the experimental observation, not individual, because individually they're crap, but if you have a lot of observation that all point in that direction, you tend to accept that that is useful information to take decision, okay? But you don't give any value to prior knowledge. In social sciences, there is no law of physics, there is no the law of sociology. There are a lot of authors that have beliefs, but they are treated like opinions, okay? No one would take a decision on the basis of one individual opinion, okay? So there is an insistence in frequentist epistemology, which is very much about experimental observation and very little about using prior knowledge, okay? On the other extreme, there is Bayesian inference, where we believe that every statement is a belief, but to each statement we attach a probability that that statement is true. And that probability is the product of two probabilities. The one that we obtain by doing experiments, so by experimental observation, which in Bayesian inference we tend to assume are quantitative and fairly free of biases, so they are good measurements. But then there is a second part, which is the prior knowledge, because in the domains that use Bayesian inference, the most important being physical sciences, we do have universal laws which has resisted any attempt of falsification for hundreds of years. The law of thermodynamics, the law of mechanics, the law of electromagnetism. So we know that we can use that prior knowledge to take decisions because they are reliable, okay? Why I'm telling you all this? Because this sounds very abstract. There are a big portion of biomedical research that, for historical reason, tend to have an epistemology much closer to social science than to physical sciences. And for good reason, because historically medicine was done very empirically with observational data which were of very low quality, usually qualitative information. So it makes sense historically. The problem is that in the last 60 years in medicine, the technological revolution for the first time has introduced a deluge of measurement, accurate measurement of the pathophysiological state of individual patients. And from this measurement, we were able to apply the biophysical laws also to the human pathophysiology. So now we have a paradox because there is prior knowledge that is very useful, but a lot of our colleagues in biomedical science simply refuse even the concept. Why this is relevant for in silico medicine. Every time you build a computer model to make a prediction, you make a prediction by using prior knowledge. This knowledge can be explicit, you use the law of physics, or it can be implicit, so it's hidden inside the experimental data that you feed with techniques like machine learning, etc. Okay? But still, you're making a prediction based on knowledge. Okay? So that's the problem. A lot of people in biomedical community have a fundamental epistemological problem with the actual idea that you can predict things. Okay? And that it's a cultural barriers, and cultural barriers don't get solved overnight. And they don't get solved just by producing individual evidence of efficacy. So quite few success stories that we have in in silico medicine are not convincing these people because they have a very profound cultural resistance. Now, you may ask, what is the solution for this? The problem is that biomedical research is changing. And as it changes, it has to develop its own new epistemology, which is going to take some time. And in my opinion, the only possibility is that you have to put in the same room experts that come from these two backgrounds, and they will fight, they will argue, but eventually a synthesis between these two positions will emerge, which will be the new epistemology that guides biomedical research. And this new epistemology will have to include modeling as one of the fundamental mechanisms for investigating the nature.
So, coming down to a bottom line, what is really needed in practical steps to bring in silico medicine in the everyday practice for the average patient?
Well, first of all, I think that what we've done so far is very good. There are areas where the idea that you can use a computer model to support clinical decision is now culturally accepted. So in those areas, the problem is just to scale up. And the primary barrier for scaling up is that developing a digital twin in healthcare, especially biophysical digital twin in healthcare, it costs an arm and a leg. We have a production process which is very artisanal. It's very, it's typical of a research laboratory. It's not industrialized, okay? So one of the elements that, in my opinion, are really strategic in the new European Virtual Human Twin Initiative is the idea that by establishing public and private repository of model and data of high quality, and by developing interoperability standard and composition standard to put together all these data and models in a clever ways, it will be possible to complete the development process of a new digital twin in healthcare in a tenth or a hundredth of the time and cost that it is today. Because most of the work can be done just by reusing resources that are available in these infrastructures, okay? Think about the validation. You develop a new digital twin and then you have to demonstrate its predictive accuracy. And typically, in order to do this, you have to start a clinical experimentation that might take some years, cost some millions. So you need to first to get the funding for this. It takes forever, okay? But if there are clinical data well designed to provide a general validation framework for certain classes of digital twins for healthcare, you could simply go there, use this data to check your accuracy. By the way, because you're comparing to the same data, you could actually prove that your digital twin is more accurate than the one from your competitor. So the whole field will grow with a positive competition based on fact and not on marketing. So that, for me, is the inner solution, and we have to embrace. Shorten the development cycle for digital twins. Second thing, there are two other areas of in silico medicine which has been less developed until now, and these are in silico trials and personal health forecasting. We spent a lot of time in the last 5 years, me personally and many others in my community, to develop the vision of in silico trials. I think that this is growing. Now a lot of biomedical industry use computer modeling and simulation in the design and testing of new medical products. So this is going fine. The third one is the Cinderella, personal health forecasting. And I believe that this is the future. So if you are a young researcher in silico medicine, that's where you have to focus your attention. Personal health forecasting is to use subject-specific model to inform the patient citizen himself or herself about their health status so that they can, A, do prevention, active prevention, and pursuing a healthy lifestyle, and B, manage their chronic conditions. Chronicity is becoming the buzzword of healthcare in developed countries nowadays. Take cancer. Cancer for many years was a lethal disease. You would die by cancer, or you survive it. That was the two state. Now we have 100,000 of patients who they are not healed, but they're still alive. And we need to ensure that they have a good quality of life. And the cost of managing this patient cannot keep increasing exponentially like it is, because it's absorbing an enormous amount of resources. So technology can make a huge difference here. Personal health forecasting is the future. And then last, I reconnect to what I was saying earlier. We need to work on this cultural divide. And the place to do this, in my opinion, are the regulatory agency. We keep stressing that the FDA and the European Medicine Agency should establish the so-called scientific advisory panels, the place where expert scientists advise the agency about methodologies, not about products, but about specific methodology, those panels should be unified independently per product type. So in other words, there should be a single panel for medical device, drugs, and ITMPs. Why? Because this will bring to the same table the engineers and the pharmacologists, the frequentists and the Bayesian. They will disagree on everything at the beginning, but eventually a middle ground, a consensus will emerge, and this middle ground is indispensable to handle the dramatic innovation that technology is bringing to the regulatory agency, that the regulatory agency are not prepared to handle. So these are the three things: accelerate development, personal health forecasting, single product panels in qualification advice in regulatory agency.
That is very nice. And also our previous guest, Mariano Vasquez, gave a sort of similar interpretation to why in silico medicine applications are coming, we could say, slower than other modeling and simulation application in other different fields. So while checking on the many things that you have done and achieved, I also found a video on YouTube about a TEDx while you were in Sheffield in 2012. And in that video, you were brilliantly explaining in silico medicine, also taking your mother as an example. What changed since then? It's been more than a decade since that presentation. And also, what is the next big thing that you expect in silico medicine or that you hope?
So one thing I remember is I was absolutely terrified. I mean, I spoke in public in front of very large audiences in my career many times, so I tend to be a relatively comfortable public speaker. But what terrified me in that experience was that I had to speak to lay person. I had to make it understandable to everyone. Okay, and this is not what I'm used to. I usually speak to expert or policymakers anyway. So that was an intense experience, but very, very nice. Very, very, in the end of the day, very gratifying. So what changed? In a certain way, not much. In the sense that in 2006, we were 10 crazy people in a room painting a picture that everybody else, even our peers, would say, "Oh, that is crazy, it will never happen." So we were visionaries, okay? And then as visionary, we became evangelists. So we were preaching, literally. I mean, for some time, I was called the VPH evangelist because at every situation, even if we went for a coffee with a friend, I would evangelize them about the VPH, the virtual physiological human. So 10 years after, the evangelistic phase was coming to an end. Insigneo, the institute I established in Sheffield, was the example. A very large research institute entirely dedicated to in silico medicine. So it was not a crazy idea of a few visionary. It was a reality, at least in the context of research, okay? So the distance between 2006 and 2016 is much bigger than the one between 2016 and today, if you see what I mean. I think we're doing fine. I think we're doing okay. There is a constant rate of innovation. There is a constant rate of penetration in the clinical practice, the industrial adoption. So we need to make it bigger. The vision we propose is a universal vision. There has to be a point in the future where every medical activity will be computer-based, computer support. It's natural. I do believe this profoundly. But before we come to that, we need to grow much faster and get much bigger, and the penetration must be much, much faster than it is today. The rate has to increase. So the whole vision of the physiome, started by Peter Hunter, the virtual physiological human, the general vision of in silico medicine started in research laboratories. Okay, and if you are a researcher, you don't look to solve easy problems. You're looking for the difficult problems, the big challenges. And so, not surprisingly, if you see most of the success story in silico medicine nowadays are in what I call extreme medicine. Reconstruct the skull of a newborn that has an extreme deformity So craniotomy, replace an extremely invasive exam with a CT scan. So these are all extreme scenario, okay? And the introduction of the technology usually improve the standard of care, the outcome. So the diagnosis gets more accurate, the treatment gets more effective, etc. But the real challenge in the European healthcare system nowadays is not efficacy, is sustainability. Because of the aging of the population, we forecast that from now and 2050, it will be very difficult, extremely difficult to continue to sustain a universal healthcare model that is so common in most of the European Union, including Italy. But I believe that universal healthcare is one of the fundamental tenets of any healthy society. So we have to defend this paradigm. How can we do this? One way is to start to focus our attention on problems that are not difficult. They are expensive. So can we use in silico medicine to reduce the cost of care? So provide the same standard, the same quality of care, but a much lower cost. Because if we look at other industrial sectors, the use of computers and computer modeling has been spent a lot in cost reduction. Think about in automotive, the transition from crash testing on physical cars to the in silico crash testing, reduction of 2 orders of magnitude in terms of cost. We're not doing this enough in silico medicine. So look at problems which are not clinically challenging, or not only. Look also at problems that are economically challenging. Is there a way we can use in silico medicine to do cost reduction?
Before you said that you were among the crazy evangelists or visionaries of In Silico Medicine. You said about the difference between 2000 and 2006, and then from 2006 to 2016 and today. So now it's been more than 25 years, so some generations have passed along, and also there are new generations. So what is the difference that you see among the first and the latest generation, and what will be your advice to the youngest generation of new researchers or students who are thinking about entering a PhD about in silico medicine?
That's a $1 million question. But it's an appropriate thing, because if you think about, when we took in the In Silico Medicine Club, we joke that there are the grandfathers of in silico, which are Peter Hunter, Dennis Noble, and they are well into their 70 now. Then there is the fathers, me and a few others, Andrew McKellock, we are in our 60s. So my point is, there's going to be a generational change soon. We are all either already retired or we will retire in the next few years, so there will be an handover. It's already happening, there is a new generation of leaders in our community that is emerging. I think this is happening in a very good continuity. So I've been witnessing the handover of leadership of some large research group recently, from the old guys of my generation to new people, and it seems to me this is working very well. So I don't see this as a challenge for the future, definitely. About the younger, at the risk of oversimplifying, I'm first of all a teacher. I teach at the university, at master level, at PhD student level. So I spend a lot of time talking with students, teaching, etc. And I've done this for 40 years. So I have seen how generation change in a way with their interaction with the higher education. And so if you made me this question 20 years ago, I would probably say, oh, you need to be careful because it's, this is very challenging. Now, my message is, are you excited about the idea of working in silico medicine? Don't worry, you'll be young only once in your life. Throw your heart beyond the barricades. Go. You will find a way to survive whatever the life throws you. I always joke about this, but I teach at the engineering faculty at the University of Bologna. Our employment rate out of the master degree is like 99% after 6 months. But still, I have a lot of students that come to me and say, Professor, if I do this course, do you think that my employability will improve? I say, what the... who care about your employment. You will worry about when you are on the job market. Now enjoy the opportunity of being a student. Do things that makes you happy, excited. So if In Silico Medicine ring your bells, go for it.
A sort of be hungry, be foolish, as Steve Jobs said. Thank you very much, Marco, for all the information and also the inspiration that you gave us through your words. And don't forget to follow us on social media and vote this podcast on Spotify. Until next month, have a nice day.